Hello, welcome to my virtual discussion, Debussy, the Painter in Music. French composer Claude Debussy started taking piano lessons at the age of 7 and entered Paris Conservatory at the age of 10. I will mention some of Debussy's early influences and peculiarities related to today's topic. Since childhood, he loved small objects and exquisite things, ornaments and butterflies. As a young child, he was fascinated by the light in the south of France with its extraordinarily vivid colors and decided to become a painter. Even though Debussy never became a painter in the traditional sense, his using of non-traditional and ambiguous harmonies, sensual sound qualities, as well as mixture of functional and non-functional chord progressions might be compared to techniques that a painter uses on canvas. To my mind, Debussy's greatest achievement is that he liberated music from the domination of the functional harmony that had prevailed for 3 centuries. It is clear that functional or tonal harmony is based on major and minor keys, and the most important chords are subdominant, dominant, and tonic. Instead, Debussy used non-traditional scales like whole tone, chromatic, or pentatonic, as well as various modes like Phrygian, Dorian, Lydian, and others. It is interesting that Debussy composed with sounds rather than notes. He was inspired from hearing Javanese gamelan music at the World Exposition of 1899. Javanese music ensemble is composed of a variety of bells, gongs, metallophones, and xylophones. For Debussy, it became the source of ideas for creating a new kind of sound. Debussy established France as a musical power and opened up Western music to non-Western influences. Debussy was one of the most influential composers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and he inspired many composers to follow. He also was one of the most important figures associated with Impressionism in music. Despite never becoming a painter, Debussy developed love for the arts and the unorthodox. He was inspired by French and Japanese painting and the Oriental culture in general. He attended the first Impressionist exhibitions in Paris, which were held in private studios. He was friends with many famous French painters of the day. I have always been fascinated by cross-media influences in music and art. I would like to share my interview from 2018 with Richmond artist Ruth Bolduan, which will further explore cross-media influences in Debussy's piano works and vice versa. I would like to introduce a special guest, Ruth Bolduan. She's a professor at VCU and a talented artist, and she has painted several paintings that are inspired from Debussy's music. And today we will be discussing cross-media influences, and that is how musicians are inspired by artists and poetry, and vice versa. Right behind us is Ms. Bolduan's painting of Delphi dancers, which, as you know, Debussy has a prelude, Delphi dancers, that I will play today. And we will talk a little bit more in detail about Ms. Bolduan's inspirations. As I know, you also are quite a good pianist, and I would like to know if you being a pianist has helped you when painting this beautiful painting.
Absolutely. What I do, in fact, what I did for this painting is I first play the piece on my piano at home, and then when I have it in my mind and in a sense in my whole body, then I go to the studio and I worked on this painting. And I probably spent a few weeks working on the painting, so it took a little time to develop, but as I developed the painting, I was always hearing the music and playing the music. I might say also, actually about that, there's a thing about sound that comes in when playing the piano, Tamara Rustanova from the Gessen school in Russia said, "A careful attitude towards sound is the main musical idea." And we can talk more about parallels between sound and the brush later, but that's something I think that's very important to remember.
That sounds very interesting. I know that you have traveled extensively across Asia and Europe. Are there any of the travel experiences have influenced you when painting this painting?
Very particularly, and in fact a lot of my paintings are a result of the memory, the process of memory over time that happens with regard to places I've been. And so many, many years ago, I spent time in Athens, and one day I decided just to walk out of Athens, and I walked up toward this mountain, and I kept walking and walking for many hours, and eventually I got over the mountain to the other side where there was this circular bay, and I walked around it, and I actually got to the ancient site of Eleusis, which is the site of the Eleusinian Mysteries. And when I went back and told my friends in Athens, they said, "Oh my goodness, you walked on the Iera Odos, or the Holy Road, which was the route that the ancient Athenians took to go to celebrate the Eleusinian Mysteries, and in fact went on to celebrate the mysteries at Delphi." So there was a very personal feeling for me in that, coming through my memory of travel.
That is very special. And what are other sources of inspiration maybe that an artist can acquire when painting? We know now about travel and the piano music of Debussy. What are some other sources perhaps?
Well, in some respects, the biggest inspiration for me when I'm painting is my painting. The painting itself inspires me. And so what happened with this painting was kind of strange. As you can see, there are some rather violent slashes of the palette knife. And I tend to really not like the palette knife. I like to paint with a brush. And I thought to myself, what's going on here? Why am I using a palette knife? And I began to think about Gustave Moreau, who was the great symbolist painter in the late 19th century in Paris, because he painted with a palette knife. And so I was sort of channeling Moreau. And I said, why? And then I thought, well, Debussy and Moreau lived in Paris at the same time. Maybe they knew each other. Well, it turns out Moreau was Debussy's favorite painter. So there are things like that that I actually only find out and am inspired by the painting itself as I work on it.
It's sort of very nice and interesting experience. Yes, that's really enjoyable. Well, the next painting that we will discuss is your beautiful painting, Isle of Joy. And we know the Debussy's complicated but yet very enjoyable and beautiful piano piece. As we know that Debussy was inspired from Watteau's painting Embarkation for Cythera when painting when composing his music. Could you please describe more in detail as an artist for our audience Watteau's painting?
Well, Watteau's painting is a good sized painting. Man, it's about this big, and it's in the Louvre, and it was painted in 1717, and there's a second version actually, which is the first one I saw when I was quite young in Berlin in the Charlottenburg Palace. But it shows an image of a happy group, rococo, dressed in fancy clothes, and what's mysterious about this painting, some people think they're embarking for the island of love, Cythera, where Venus was born, and other people think they're leaving it after a whole night's stay on the island. So it has this mysterious quality at its core. And the painting itself it's very interesting in the way that it's painted. I might perhaps tell you some of the parallels between the sound techniques that I hear in Debussy's music and what I see in Watteau's painting, and then what I also try to bring into my painting as a fusion of those two things. And again, thinking of what Tamara Rustikova said, that sound is the most important element, the type of sound that you make. In Watteau's painting, he uses sometimes very thin washes, very thin brush strokes. Other places he uses a tiny brush to make lots of fast little, really almost staccato kinds of skittering marks with the brush. And so, what do you think? I mean, do you feel like that relates to Les Joyeuses?
Now, when I think about it, it really seems that it does relate, because we could relate the thinner brushstroke technique to the trills and the piano sections of that piece, and that makes absolute sense to me after discussing this with you. So that's a perfect comparison.
Yeah, and I'm sure Debussy obviously must have gone to the Louvre many times and looked at that beautiful painting, because it's such an inspiration. Just as he looked at in Delphic Dancers, he looked at the actual statue that had been recently unearthed of the 3 Delphic dancers itself. So I think that link for him between being inspired by art and then composing music, for me, it's that I hear the music and then I'm inspired to make art. But there is a different aesthetic at play here, and that is that music occurs over time. For example, if I wanted to look at Les Joyeuses, I would go to the Louvre, very nice thing to do.
Yes, absolutely.
And then I could spend 10 seconds looking at it and walk away, have a quick little, or I could spend 3 hours looking at it, or more. But if I hear the music, it takes place in the time that it takes. I can't say, oh, I'll just listen to it for 10 seconds, because I wouldn't hear it. And if I sat there for 2 more hours after the piece is finished, nothing would happen. So it's interesting that even though there are all these relationships, there's that fundamental aesthetic difference between the two.
That is a very interesting idea, and actually I had never thought about this, the time we would spend observing a painting. So now we can all kind of be aware of the fact and compare that with a piece of music. But I would like to also know, when painting your beautiful painting, what inspired you more? Was it Watteau's painting? Was it Debussy's beautiful piece? What was a greater source of inspiration for you as an artist?
Well, I think it kind of goes to what I just talked about. I mean, they are fundamentally very different aesthetics, the playing of music or the writing of music and the looking at or painting a painting. And so I think that I'd have to say I was inspired equally by them, but in different ways that came together to make the painting that I made.
That is very interesting. That was a very enjoyable discussion about your beautiful artworks. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I think we have a completely different outlook now from the artist standpoint and musical connection.
And thank you very much, Ruta, for asking me. It's a great pleasure to talk about music and art together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
From the 2 pieces mentioned in the interview with the artist Ruth Bolduan, I would like to perform Debussy's Prelude, Danseuses de Delphes. As already mentioned, when composing this prelude, Debussy was most likely inspired by sculpture of 3 bacchantes situated on top of the pillar, which he saw in the Louvre Museum. In this prelude, Debussy takes us into our imagination, to the ancient Greek city of Delphi, the place of the temple of Apollo. It was my pleasure to share with you my interview with Richmond artist Ruth Bolduan and also share my findings about cross-media influences in Debussy's music.